What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Staff and Faculty Sessions Podcast. I'm Chelsea.
And I'm Anna. And this is the podcast where we will spill the tea on higher ed and name the ways that authoritarianism is creeping up in our classrooms, our campuses, and in our communities.
Because higher ed doesn't exist in a vacuum, the same systems of control, retaliation, and silencing we see in fascist regimes are also thriving in our own institutions.
Yep. So we're here to help connect the dots, to resist together, and to remind all of us that our stories matter and our resistance matters. Our liberation is tied together. So grab your mug and let's get into it.
Psychological safety is about being able to speak up, ask questions, or even admit mistakes without the fear of being punished or humiliated or retaliated against. And one of my favorite researchers, Amy Edmondson, she defines it as a shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk taking. When that safety is missing, people stop contributing. They stop contributing ideas, which means they may stop letting you know if something is wrong. When psychological safety is not there, you get silence. And when you get silence, you stall innovation. You don't get any good ideas. Processes don't get improved.
If you're vibing with us, subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and don't forget to rate us 5 stars. Also, follow us on Instagram and YouTube and share staff and faculty sessions with your peeps. Want another way to support our work? Shop our activist merch at vitalvitavendors.com or buy us a coffee or lunch using the PayPal QR code on the screen.
What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Staff and Faculty Sessions. I am your co-host, Chelsea.
And I'm Anna. And we are here with an awesome guest that we have been really looking forward to having on. And we know that she is going to provide you all with so much insight and support that we all desperately need. So here we have Dr. Braden. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, certainly. I am super, super excited to be here. And thank you for having me. I am Dr. Chanel M. Braden. Most people online know me as Dr. B, the workplace coach. I'm an organizational leadership and conflict resolution scholar and practitioner. I'm a researcher. I'm also a corporate legal professional by day. My work centers on psychological safety, what it looks like, what destroys it, and how we can rebuild it in workplaces that have learned to normalize dysfunction. So I'm super excited to be here for this conversation.
I'm already thrilled. So usually what we do to kind of get the episode started is just kind of checking in. So how is your spirit?
My spirit is steady. It's steady, but I'll be a little honest. There's a heaviness that comes from hearing the plight of so many professionals, especially marginalized professionals, describe the same patterns of harm at work over and over again, repeated patterns. So the part that sustains me is knowing that the work that I do, teaching about psychological safety and conflict navigation, is helping people to name what's happening and to also reclaim their peace. So naming what we're dealing with is powerful and is really our very first step in freedom. So my spirit is steady because I'm on a mission.
That is exactly what we needed to hear. We were just telling folks, we were just telling Dr. B that we want her to record some mindfulness stuff. So if you like the vibe, let us know. Put it in the comments. Let's encourage her because her voice just immediately brings us so much peace. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like that's really reminiscent of how I'm feeling right now as well. There's a part of me that feels grounded and, convicted in the movement that we're in and the fight that we're in and the solidarity that we're trying to build. And that is definitely the hope piece of things. And, existing in fascism and especially working in higher ed and seeing the very devastating impacts of that fascism taking over and defunding all of these things that our literal safety nets for community is just painful. And so I think it's hard sometimes to find that balance. So, but I'm grateful. My spirit is grateful to be here with you because I know it's going to feed the soul.
Yes. I was definitely feeling a little less steady earlier in the week. I needed to just kind of have one of those days where I like cried for half the day and just sort of released. And I'm definitely feeling restored. I think looking at the resistance that's happening, right, in Chicago and other places where people are like, don't come to Chicago, don't come and mess with our people. So I think that growing solidarity, right, I think is a beautiful thing to bear witness to. And it gives me a little bit of hope in terms of like whatever's next, right? We got us. Um, I think it's been a little bit of a challenging week in terms of like bearing witness to certain presentations and meetings and things that feel very gaslighty, but just sort of reminding myself and one another that we're not crazy, that we're not the problem, that these are institutional problems, and that people like you are part of the solution. And so I'm really excited to just get more wisdom from you, and so that we can also help our people that are, still really struggling in these systems in whatever ways we can.
Absolutely.
We're talking today about gaslighting at work and how it can be super isolating and what the dynamics are that support psychological safety and what creates a psychologically safe workplace. And so, as you all know, we are not just here to complain. We are here to offer solutions and to offer resources to help you all also advocate for yourselves and for each other, right? It's collective work that we all need to take ownership of. And so that's one of the reasons that Dr. Braden stood out as an amazing collaborator because of her background in the legal field and now her completion of her doctoral degree and the research that she's done. Congratulations. Just seemed like a perfect mesh of, what we want to talk about. So usually what we do to kind of start our episodes is to cover some of the tea in the news. So are there any kind of news stories that are standing out to you or that you want to discuss that you're kind of seeing play out?
And I was reading through the articles on workplace incivility and burnout in higher ed, but I just want to add it's higher ed, it's corporates, governments, nonprofit, healthcare, it's everywhere. But what stood out to me most was that they aren't isolated experiences, they're systemic. And when we start looking at them as systemic issues, we can start taking a closer look at how we can kind of peel back the layers. Because when organizations ignore psychological safety, people start to self protect instead of collaborate. So no one wins in that type of a situation. And I know in higher ed and corporate spaces also, we normalize overwork, but we also normalize suppressing our emotions. We call it professionalism. That's you're not being professional because I have an outburst, because someone's gaslighting me to the max. Um, but what we really mean is silence. That silence is where gaslighting gets its energy. If we're silent, the toxicity spreads and it then becomes the culture. And when we witness things like bullying or inequity, it impacts, and I've been researching this a lot the past couple of weeks, it impacts our nervous system, whether you're a target of it or whether you're just a bystander witnessing it. So it runs deep.
Woo. So with the nervous system piece, because Anna and I have talked about this a lot as we sort of both we're experiencing exactly what you're naming and trying to engage in more sort of somatic work. Also understanding that many folks are survivors of various forms of violence, right? So we're also taught to disconnect from our bodies because our bodies aren't safe places. And so getting more into that sort of somatic work, really thinking about like contagious nervous systems. If everybody's walking around on edge and heightened,
Yes.
what does that do to the environment, right?
Mhm.
And how important is it to address that?
And that actually reminds me of a video that I cannot stop thinking that I think you posted yesterday or the day before about that woman in Dallas who was shot. And that felt so, I don't even know, dystopian, terrifying. For some context for folks who haven't heard, there was a woman who was holding a door open for somebody and they didn't say thank you. And um, I believe it was the woman who was holding the door open was the one who shot the other person. It
That's
was
where
a
I'm a
little
little
confusing.
fuzzy. Yes,
Yeah.
it's very confusing.
The point is, one of the folks shot the other person multiple times in front of their daughter, and the woman passed away. And like that really hit hard because it really speaks to this concept of like our nervous systems and how jacked up everyone is right now and how we do not have the tools and resources at hand, very accessible to everyone. And so, yeah, I would love to hear more about kind of your thoughts on, yeah, how do we kind of move through this in a way that like reminds us of our humanity and our dignity, and that doesn't make death the only solution that seems plausible right now.
That shooting in particular, like I kept like searching for different articles to get the full picture, the truth. Like I'm still confused on whether it was the one holding the door who didn't get the thank you or the one who didn't say thank you. I'm not sure which one it was, but all I could think, like, getting your doctorate makes you look at almost everything like a researcher. So you always want to find out the why. So you're no longer quick to judgment. And you can't put all of that on social media because then people will say you're protecting the shooter. They shouldn't have done that. But to have so much rage that this incident sparks a fight that goes from one store to another store to a parking lot. They got kicked out of, I think, PetSmart because they were arguing or fighting. Then there was a confrontation in the parking lot, and that's when the shooting happened. But to have so much rage that's your answer is like you're not only destroying the life of the person you kill, but her daughter who witnessed it and the nurses who were trying to provide CPR and all of the witnesses to that. Like this is when you talk about nervous system, the woman who shot, that's the person I want to study because I want to know what led to this point. Me and my husband were talking about this. If I open the door for someone and they don't say thank you, I'm going to say you're welcome and go about my business because I can cope with it's like some people can't cope with rejection or everything is a perceived disrespect. When sometimes you're just, especially if you have your child with you, you might be preoccupied and you don't even think about it. Or you later on might say, oh, thank you. I've done that. But that is what society is looking like right now. And it's super scary because we can't just all stay in our homes. So you can't help but think, who's next?
Yeah, that's been the terrifying thing of all of this. And, at colleges, we see this type of violence really
Yes.
rising. And so I think that's part of the reality that we have to face is, there's a lot of pain that people are experiencing right now for a variety of reasons. And it just seems like we're adding fuel to the fire and there's no water being provided anywhere to like fight that fire, And so yeah, it's just scary to think, which is why I think this conversation is so important. We want
Yes.
to help empower folks to figure out how do we build structures that are responsive to mental health needs, both when you're in, crisis time, but also trying to prevent crisis time from happening because we're doing proactive things that are caring for people every day.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think that is for me what struck me so much about that story was I think the initial shock that it was a woman that did that, right? So when we think about like the proliferation of violence in this country, in this world, right? It's typically men. It's overwhelmingly men. It's overwhelmingly white men.
Yes.
So when I hear this story, that's what was jarring for me, right? Like this story wouldn't have surprised me if a man had shot someone in a fit of rage, right? When we see this happening to women or happening with women, knowing that that's an aberration, right?
Yes.
I think of like the Oprah book, which I used with my students, was like not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. Like
Mm.
what happened to that woman that she was so on edge that she would do that. Um, yeah.
She is 22 years old, the shooter. 22, barely an adult. So you just can't help but wonder, like you said, what happened to her?
Yeah.
So, concealed carry is a whole another thing, but I don't know. It's there's so much we don't know. Like the people who weren't there, we don't know who started the altercation that happened in the parking lot. So in that moment, did she think that the woman was getting the better of her and she needs to protect herself? Like we don't know. We don't have all the answers, but just just pausing during that whole door thing could have stopped all of this. Somebody just pausing before they responded or reacted.
Mm. That space in between, right? There's that quote.
Right.
Is
Yeah.
it Eli? He was in a concentration camp and he talks
Eli
about,
Wiesel.
Mm.
yes, that space in between, like trigger and response, right? That's where our
Yes.
power is. And I knew in my, former institution that I was in for a very long time, I knew that when I couldn't find my power in that in between space because I was just being beat up so often and no matter what I tried didn't, change anything. No matter how rational I was, no matter how much data I provided, no, like none of it, no, even if I won awards. Um, so I knew that once I lost that in between space, right? That I felt like I
Mm.
lost my power because I was just
Yes.
so activated all of the time that was and it was killing me. I mean, it really was killing me. And I wasn't present for my family, for myself. Yeah. So once we get to that place and you can't yes, for a lot of people, and I've been in therapy, I was doing all these things, but when you're in that environment, right? It's like we
Yes.
tell people to go and get help and do all the right things, but at some point just the assault becomes too much, right?
Yes.
So and then you've got all these people that care about you, that you care about that are bearing witness and you're asking for support and then you get problematized by them as well and it's just this cycle that's really hard. So I don't know if you can do a little bit of a deeper dive on like the isolation piece and
Mhm.
that like responding to abuse, right? We often yeah, go ahead. We often only see the response or we only want to see the response to problematize that person versus
Mhm.
all the things that were leading up to that response.
I think the biggest thing when I do coaching, and some of the things I try to tell people is the most important thing for me after I left a toxic workplace, I had to do the work internally to understand my triggers. And not only understanding my triggers, but developing emotional intelligence and social intelligence, social emotional intelligence. Because me and my husband talk, we have a lot of really good conversations, but the person who maintains their control in that conversation is going to get the credibility. The person who flies off the handle will not. So my husband is competitive. So he's like, I'm not going to be the one that loses my credibility. So we got it. But we talk about all the time. Just take a breathe, just pause. I know my triggers as a Black woman in corporate America who's been through a toxic work environment. Disrespect is a huge trigger for me. Gaslight. I don't like to be gaslit. I think that's disrespectful to gaslight intelligent people. Those are my triggers. So when I'm going into a conversation, knowing that this person has a reputation for doing this, I try to prepare myself before that conversation. And something that has helped me, and I give to people that I coach scripts. I have
Mhm.
these little scripts of things to say when I'm caught in a moment where the blood is rising and I need to say something, but I need to keep my cool. I whip them out. I whip out these scripts, and that gives me time. It gives me time to calm down. It gives me time to try to reframe that conversation. So it's internal. It starts with us because we can't control what people do, how people treat us, or what people say. We can only control how we react and respond to that.
Mhm. Mm.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest things that I think my therapist helped me understand is we can't control what these other people are doing. And so we have to figure out our strategies for surviving and then, taking responsibility for choices. Right now, I think it's an interesting time just because of the job market. So leaving places may not be a realistic option right now. And we live in an extractive capitalistic society that doesn't care that you're experiencing massive harm at your workplace. Your rent is
Yes,
due on the first and you better fucking pay it.
exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
So I think that was and we can get deeper into those strategies moving forward, but I wanted to kind of start first with seeing if you can kind of ground us in some common understanding around what is psychological safety and what about it is important for us as employees to learn, but also maybe for administrators and people who are kind of actually in positional power.
Absolutely. Psychological safety is like my pastime. I go and I research and I read articles because it was part of the theoretical framework for my study. And the reason why I chose three theories. The reason why I chose that one in particular was because of my experience. When I was dealing with workplace conflict, I didn't have psychological safety. So I wanted to study, like, is this a phenomena? What's going on? So I chose people who were they were like me. The population was me, Black women who worked in legal, but they weren't attorneys. Psychological safety is about being able to speak up, ask questions, or even admit mistakes without the fear of being punished or humiliated or retaliated against. And one of my favorite researchers, Amy Edmondson, she defines it as a share. I can't believe I memorized this because I have a bad memory. A shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk taking. So when that safety is missing, people stop contributing. They stop contributing ideas, which means they may stop letting you know if something is wrong. If you think about it in that context, in a legal world, if you have a paralegal who works for an attorney who's like maybe the dark triad of leadership, narcissistic, and all of that, and there's a mistake on something, she's going to be terrified to raise that issue. So what happens? The mistake follows through. It could be a contract term that could cost the company millions of dollars, but that's on leadership for not providing the safety so that this paralegal felt like she could say, oh, you made a mistake on this agreement. So when it's missing, people shut down. People go into survival mode. And for marginalized professionals, it's not just about being afraid of a bad performance evaluation. It's about the racial or gendered or power based repercussions that come with telling the truth, that come with speaking up. So when psychological safety is not there, you get silence. And when you get silence, you stall innovation. You don't get any good ideas. Processes don't get improved. It just, it's a never ending cycle.
Whew, taking that all in.
I know. Can't
Yeah.
can't relate. What? Getting isolated for telling the truth? For
God.
asking very reasonable, rational questions?
Questions. Yes. Yes.
It's it's just sad because it just really speaks to that place that we're in this world, and we get so many stories from people sharing how unsafe they feel to even bring up the most basic things that are like not or shouldn't be controversial, but
Exactly.
it kind of brings up some questions for me around especially because you kind of looked into this with through that leadership lens as well. um are there dynamics that are being created by kind of administration, by systems that really kind of facilitate this being the predominant way of operating?
I think it's leadership pipeline. When you have leader upon leader upon leader in organization who don't provide psychological safety for their teams, that becomes the norm. That becomes the culture. Once it's infested in a culture, the only thing that'll change it is new leaders who are ethical, who are willing to do the work. And it's really simple to spot. If you are a leader and you have staff needs, no one ever says anything. No one ever gives feedback, or it's just dead silence. You need to start thinking about why, because it only takes one time for me to say something at a team meeting and I get cut off, or someone makes my idea feel like it's idiocy. That's the last time I'm going to offer an idea. It only takes one time to destroy it. So you really have to develop a culture of psychological safety, a culture of leaders and admitting their mistakes. That's a big part of this. Vulnerability. I have a manager now who, this is probably the highest level of psychological safety I've ever had in my entire career, because she admits she makes mistakes. If someone points out a mistake, she's not throwing me under the bus. Number one, she's going to defend me whether or not I did make the mistake. She's going to make sure that I don't feel like an idiot for making that mistake. That is so important to heal my nervous system. So you can't heal from that if you're not in a safe space. That's another point I wanted to make. Your nervous system can get so shot that you actually have to be in a safe space to heal. Because if you go from a toxic place to another toxic place, your nervous system is going to go bonkers. And what's that is going to create is you're going to start to do the same patterns that a bully is doing, because that's the only way that you feel powerful. So it's an endless cycle. Leaders have to be educated on this. There's so many people who send me DMs on TikTok to say, I've never heard of this psychological safety. Or what if someone doesn't talk because they're just shy? You got to look beyond that. You got to look beyond. I'm an introvert, believe it or not. I'm an introvert. So I don't like to speak publicly, but I have a voice. I have something to share. I have confidence. So I'm going to share that. If you have someone in your team who never gives feedback during a team meeting, you need to try to figure out why. Ask questions.
Yeah, everything is just landing so like deeply. And I think that really kind of brings me back to what you said in the beginning of the episode about the self work that needs to be done. And so it also brings up a piece of curiosity for me around the concept of like basically needing new leadership to shift those dynamics. I'm just thinking about how many people are in those positions that aren't going anywhere for
Mhm.
whatever reason. Um, do we think that there is a way for people to who are presently in that leadership? I guess, like, how do we speak to those people in those positions who are not being self-aware? What are some like tips that you have, or what have you seen maybe work when, because I think that's part of the struggle, right? People don't understand the connection between the way that I am in my own life and the things that are impacting my daily lens, and how that kind of carries out in every part of my life, right? And so we talked about it with the disembodiment, we talked about it with the dissociation. And I think in the US in particular, we've done such a good job of normalizing that and compartmentalizing everything. And it's like, well, there's professional Anna, and then there's like wife Anna, and then there's like, daughter Anna, and all of those people are different. For a lot of people, right? Not for me. I can't do that. My desire for honesty and justice just doesn't allow for compartmentalization that way. But, like, how do we cross that barrier to help people really like understand that and connect that and hopefully move toward that?
We have to show them data. Like, you need the data. You can't prioritize things that you don't measure. And what I love about my current company is we're starting to look at that. We're starting to take a deeper dive into psychological safety and what it means. We're starting to look at why people are silent. Someone in leadership role that's making these decisions need to start focusing on things like psychological safety, because if leaders aren't trained on it, they're going to continue doing what they're doing. So their companies need to develop training in psychological safety. But it has to start with a simple survey to measure how people feel about giving feedback, how people feel about asking questions. Because without that data, you can't really design a program that's going to help leaders to understand the importance of psychological safety. So it starts with data, research data, and then training.
So you're saying we have to actually care enough to measure
Yes.
to
Yes.
then
If you're going to
address it.
prioritize it, you have to measure it first. It's like a lot of companies do these annual surveys, but some companies actually take the data from those surveys and they do something with it. That's a company I can stand behind. Percent. The ones that do surveys and don't even have a box at the end for comments, they really don't care. They really don't care. You've got to care. And the first sign of a company that doesn't truly care about the well-being of their employees, I'm out the door. I'm out the door.
Ah, that's so empowering. There's so much I could say. Yeah. I was going back in my mind too when Anna was saying that. I think that's one of the reasons that we really sort of found each other in our workplace. I had been there for a very long time, starting from a student, right? So I had all this lived experience that was directly related to the work that I was doing, and that was, very impactful. And I'd often be the only one, saying it in the meeting or trying to say, hey, we've done this the same way for 10 years and it's not really working. Can we rethink this? And just
Yes.
sort of getting nowhere. Um, and then Anna came along and she was the other one where we were sort of trying to be visionary and all of that, and asking questions. But it's so funny when you talk about people just kind of shutting down and going, what they call gray rock. Um, and I wonder if there's a difference, right? When you're in a corporate environment or another environment. For us, we're working with students and with some of the most marginalized students in the system, right?
Mm.
Our first generation students, predominantly Black and Brown students, single parents, formerly incarcerated folks, foster youth, et cetera, where like their whole lives are hinging on this opportunity, right? For them, this can literally be a life or death situation. And so how
Mm.
hard it is in that environment. And then just being a neurodivergent person and the commitments that,
Mhm.
like, talk a little bit about how you can still sort of hold yourself in that environment when it feels like there's so much at stake.
Yeah.
And for those bystanders, right? We talk a lot about that normalization, right? And we can focus more on this actually. Like, what does the bystander do? Like, what is their role? And why do more people not step into that? And I think the answer is probably pretty obvious because they don't want to be retaliated against too. But how do we get that collective courage, right? If we talk about contagious nervous systems, can we talk about, contagious curiosity and courage, right?
Gray rocking to me means that I'm protecting myself from certain behaviors. But gray rocking will never bring down my standards of work, or in your case, standards of service. I'm still
Mm-hmm.
going to do my work. I'm still going to be a high performer. But the gray rocking is going to shield me, is to help me protect my peace against all of those other behaviors. And again, it's a lot of internal work we have to do. But for the bystanders, I mean, we have to really understand the damage that silence is doing in the workplace. A lot of people are afraid. I get it. I'm just not that person. If I see whether it's happening to me or someone else, I'm going to voice it. And that's because I've experienced it and I know how it feels. And if enough of us heal our nervous system and go into these safe spaces and start to see it happening to other people, we can be a voice to them. But we have to heal ourselves first. If we're not healed, even if we try to defend someone as a bystander, we're probably not going to make the right decisions. And we're
Mm-hmm.
probably going to make that situation worse. for that person. So it's just like putting your seatbelt on first on in a plane, putting your thing on first. You got to heal yourself first. That gives you the strength to then be an effective bystander, where you won't have the fear of retaliation because you understand how it works. And when I coach people, I'm going to say this quickly. I tell them, when you start a new job, while you're doing all your trainings and getting set up on technology, I need you to pull down all of those policies. I need you to pull down the anti every policy. Pull it all down, have it by you. Don't have to read it right away, but start to look at those policies. And the moment you see someone operating outside of that policy, whether it's towards you or someone else, you need to start waving that flag now and get silence. I don't like to say this because I feel like if you don't feel safe enough to speak, I don't think you should. You need to understand whether or not you're safe. But me, I'm always going to be safe now after what I've experienced and what I've researched. It's always going to be safe enough for me to speak. Whether or not leadership does anything about it will determine whether or not I stay or go, because I will not stay in a space that's going to jack my nervous system up again. I've been through that before.
That's so powerful to think about. Again, just recentering and the can't control other people. So what are the strategies that you can implement? And I think, we often talk about the master's tools never being the thing that are going to help us, destroy the system that the master built. But while we're existing in said system, I think that is one of the strategies that we need for survival.
Yeah.
And maybe at some point we get to a place where, we don't have to know those policies and we don't have to, report those things because people are more self-aware and more connected
Yes.
to themselves and to each other. But in the meantime, I think that piece is so critical about really understanding what is your company or your institution saying they value, and
Yes.
really tracking. And again, this comes a little easier to some of us as people with pattern recognition and who,
Hmm.
have experienced the pattern
Yes.
multiple times. Um, the thing that also came up for me was the pet to threat thing, which I
Mm.
feel like has been so prevalent in my career, of just people initially being like, wow, she's great. Look at all these ideas and she does them and she follows through and like all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, I'm a threat to your job. I'm a threat to your comfort. And so I think one of the pieces that really stood out to me that you were speaking about was that concept of safety. And so I would love to dig in a little bit there, just about like what is safety versus comfort. And I think this is something that really stands out to me, especially when we're talking about the bystanders, because in my experience, what I have witnessed and, from the stories that I have heard from others, it just seems like people are choosing comfort, not safety, right?
Yes.
You're not actually unsafe. Nobody's going to do anything to you. You're not going to lose your job. Most of you are going to be fine. So it's just you're avoiding discomfort.
Hmm.
And so I want to dig into that a little bit, and maybe if there's info that you have about the impacts of that silence and choosing that comfort, like how does that kind of play out?
It's confidence. It's all about confidence. And I feel that leaders have so much responsibility on their shoulders, especially the leaders who are leading someone who came from another company who was badly bullied, harassed, and haven't been healed. So then that leader may have created a psychologically safe environment, but that person doesn't have the confidence to, fully thrive in that environment. So when you say choosing discomfort, that's absolutely, people will choose comfort, especially those who lack confidence. So if you're like, I'm gonna use myself as an example. I came from a toxic place. I wasn't fully healed when I joined my new company, but the toxicity that I dealt with didn't rock my confidence. Like I never lost that piece of me. some people do lose that piece of them. So let's say I did lose that piece of me. I wouldn't be confident enough to recognize the red flags. I'm confident enough to recognize the red flags. Whether or not I say something means I need to evaluate if I'm safe enough to say something. But if you're coming from the perspective of someone who has been badly abused at a workplace, confidence shattered, everything shattered, they're just a walking target. Any bully at that new company is immediately going to zone in on that person because they're going to be an easy target for them. Leaders, and I love the way you said that safety versus comfort. That's another leader responsibility, unfortunately. It is. They need to create an environment of safety. And if that environment of safety exists and this person is still uncomfortable, then that's another conversation that they need to have with that person. But the person has to be willing to have the conversation. So I feel like we have to do a lot of self-work. Leaders also have to do a lot of self-work because you can't build psychological safety on your team if you haven't built it within yourself. And psychological safety is not just a leader responsibility. All of us are responsible for it. I think the leaders set the tone, but in our daily interactions, because in a team meeting, your colleague can say something, can try to gaslight you or humiliate you. It's not always the leader.
Mhm.
So self-work is everybody's responsibility, really examining the parts of us that need control, the parts of us that need validation, and the parts of us that feel that we need to be perfect to be secure. So that person who has the discomfort probably thinks that everything they have to say has to be perfect. That's self-work. We've got to confront our triggers. We have to ask ourselves, why does feedback make me feel defensive? Or why do I feel threatened when somebody else shines? Because that's another big part of this. There's a secret competition in the workplace. If you have a high performer who's confident, then there's this other person who be like, I'm not as good as they are, or I'm not as smart, I don't have as many degrees as they, so I'm not going to say anything. They've got to be willing to put in the self-work. None of the responsibility is on just one person.
I really love that because I think that's really where we are shifting, right? To a more communal understanding of the process of establishing culture, whether it's societal, whether it's at work. And I think that's partially why the silence is so deafening sometimes, because whether you choose to acknowledge it or not, your silence is making a choice and is making a
Yes.
contribution to the culture that we're building. And so I did a mini episode by myself last week, and I talked about this quote that just keeps coming back to me around silence is a slow kind of death. You don't notice the decay until your own truth starts rotting inside you. And I just feel like that really encompasses a big part of the struggle right now, is that people are so fearful,
Yes.
some very valid fears and some are just perceived fears of that are actually discomfort, right? And so again, that self-work, that seeing ourselves as part of a community rather than an individual who's trying to figure out who I need to step on to climb the ladder and make the money and all the things. So yeah, I don't know, just
Yes.
resonating a lot with what I've been thinking about.
I
Ugh.
think that's oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking about the niceness piece too, right? That like that false niceness that is also like so many people, their biggest fear is being disliked by terrible
Mhm.
people. And I'm just like, I'm a love or hate kind of person, and I'm okay with that, right? Because I'm not gonna stay silent. But when you even think about people's fear, right? The fear
Mhm.
is this thing that it just creates all that falseness. But please go ahead, Dr. Brad, and I'm sure you have something more eloquent to say.
No, that's perfect. That's leading into the reason why I added conflict theory to my theoretical framework, because I want to let people know that conflict isn't inherently bad, but what's harmful about it is how power is used in conflict. Many workplaces are built on this kind of power over where the leaders rely on control instead of curiosity with their people. So especially fragile leaders, I call them ego-led managers. They can't tolerate disagreement. So when you name a problem, you say pet to, what was the word you used? Pet to threat.
Threat. Yeah. Pet to threat.
When you name a problem, you become the problem. It's classic gaslighting, but they'll even provoke you. Like they'll bring you out of character to, collect evidence that you're the problem. And I like to tell people it's a setup. Like, don't take the bait. It's a setup. Emotional regulation, doing all that self-work, you've got to really arm yourself with this stuff before you go into a toxic workplace.
And then, like you said, when you can't heal until you get out of it, right? So we've got all these people that, and I know this was, for me, having to go on a medical leave, right? Because I was really
Me
unwell
too.
due to all of it. and then experiencing retaliation for doing that,
Yes.
right? And then all that work I had tried to do just totally got, because I came back and it was worse. And it was people picking at you to try to get, the response. And no matter what I did, the self-work was not enough. So at that point, like, what's your advice for folks? Like, it sounds like you're very clear, you're very confident and clear about, like, you got to leave that environment. And it sounds like that's what it is, right?
And, I get a lot of comments on my posts where people are saying, you have some people who say, well, just leave. And then I say, it's not that simple for everyone, especially like you mentioned in this job market. No, we got mortgage. Some people have car note. We have a lot going on. So sometimes we have to learn how to survive it until we can find another environment. But to survive it, I'm like, there's no escaping the self-work that we have to do. There's just no escaping it. Something I was going to, I'm working on now is some type of a program that organizations can put into place for people who are joining their company who have dealt with this type of a situation. Because there's nothing like starting at a new company, understanding that that company cares about your well-being and wants to put you on the right foot from day one. So those are the types of things that I'm working on, like my spare time. I've
Mm.
replaced all my research and writing with research and writing and concepts.
Yeah.
I did a presentation a few nights ago to a paralegal association about fostering psychological safety while navigating conflict in legal, and it felt amazing to have the insights from the people who were part of that webinar. But every time I do a presentation or a training, I'm researching and I'm gaining more knowledge. And then I have to find ways to get that knowledge out. A lot of it is through my TikToks. I have a store on TikTok where I have like little guys, like, this is how you find red flags. I'm going to send you that to give out
Yes.
after this.
And I want you to
Um,
share.
yes. I mean, people need to, like, we are getting knowledge. All of us, we're doing research. We're using our experiences and we're sharing that. More people need to do this.
Yes.
That's how we change it. More people need to have the confidence and the knowledge and the experience to do this.
Mm.
And even just the curiosity,
Yeah.
right? To be
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
what's driving this? Because
Yep.
there's also so much that I think is still not really clear um, on a big level. Who was it that recently said a quote? I can't remember who it was. I'll have to look it up and then I'll credit them in the show notes. But it was, they said something that was like, I'm rarely wrong. I'm just often early.
Yes.
And that was kind of talking about those of us, again, who, particularly from neurodivergent backgrounds and backgrounds that experience life differently than, folks who maybe have more privilege, is oftentimes we're the canary in the coal mine being like, this is bad. This is bad. But then people are like, you're dramatic, you're overreacting. And then 5 years down the road, everything that you tried to prevent is happening now. And so it's like, I would love to hear a little bit more about that concept of like what to look for when you're job searching, especially right now. It's hard out here in these streets, first of all. Second of all, the toxicity seems so present across the board in every industry. So, like, what are the things that our listeners can be looking for when they're seeking out new positions? You know, what are those red flags? What are the green flags? And then can we also kind of talk about, if you have thoughts on this, what can the employer be doing? I know you mentioned the onboarding piece, but even in the job search process, are there things that the employer can be doing to demonstrate? And for employers who might be listening, we're not telling you how to fake it to trick us to get in there, okay?
You know, that's an excellent question. I think it starts during the job search. Like when you're applying to these jobs, look at the company's website and see how transparent they are with all of these policies, anti-bullying, anti-harassment. A lot of a lot of companies don't have these policies, and to me, that's a red flag. Whether you're a public or a private company, it's a red flag that I can't go and find your policy. So that won't stop me from proceeding to the next stage. When I'm talking to that recruiter, I'll ask, do you have policies on X, Y, and Z? As a Black woman, that's very important to me. If they don't have them, I'm probably going to bow out. I probably will, because that's an immediate red flag. And then when you have the interview with the hiring manager, there's questions you can ask about culture and psychological safety. How does the team deal with disagreements amongst the team? Be very clear about what your role is going to be, because ambiguity is where chaos is going to thrive. If there are 3 paralegals on the team, are their roles delineated? This person has this job, this person, that's very important to know. It's also important to know how the manager handles feedback, or if they even ask for feedback, or how they deliver feedback. These are the questions we have to start asking in the interview. And what I always say is, if the hiring manager is caught off guard by these questions and takes them a while, or the eyes start shifting around, they're making something up because they know it's going to sound good. But we have really got to pay attention when we ask these questions for the body language and how they respond to these questions. But we've got to start tackling that in the beginning. Some hiring manager might pass the interview test, and then you get there and it's a whole other situation. You have to start seeing those red flags from day one. So that's in the red flag, because these are things that we can just start spotting in the very beginning and raising the red flags against, or having conversations with our leaders. That's the difficult part, or that's the part that people are most uncomfortable with. But I always tell people, it's the very beginning of that conversation is going to be uncomfortable. Just getting the conversation started will be uncomfortable. But if the leader isn't toxic, if you have an ethical leader who provides leadership support, that's going to be a very good conversation. And they will probably appreciate you for raising it. Back to the silence. Silence isn't helping anyone. It's not helping yourself. It's not helping ethical leaders. It's helping the bullies. It's helping the toxic leaders. That's who it's helping. And I think just the courage to have those courageous conversations, and just, it's like what they say, do it afraid. Just do it afraid. It's not going to hurt you. And don't wait. Like, go in that door setting boundaries early. They need to know that you're not 24/7. They need to know. You don't have to broadcast it, but they need to know.
Which is so fascinating, I think, in higher ed, because in ways this is probably different than corporate, right? So many of us grow up in that system, right? And I don't want to use the word groomed because it's not the right word, but I haven't found, excuse me, my dog is needing some attention.
Conditioned.
Sorry. Yeah, conditioned, right? To just, no breaks, do it for the student, and you do everything for the student, right? But if it's never good enough, or it's not the way they want it to look. So if you wouldn't mind, in terms of red flags, there's been a lot of this recently, like the red flag of like, we're a family here. So if you hear we're a family here, what does that mean as like a red flag and your ability to actually set boundaries?
We're a family here is an immediate red flag. If they say that during the interview, I would ask them to elaborate. What does that mean? Because to me, that means you work whenever we want you to work. That means you do whatever we want you to do. Your family life doesn't matter to us. You know, if you're doing school in the evenings, that doesn't matter to us. But that's a red flag to me. We're a family. And I think a lot of leaders are understanding that and they're like getting that out of their vocabulary because it doesn't have a positive connotation to it anymore. It has a negative. It means that, okay, you're going to expect me to do things the way you want them done. And if I don't, you know, it's the whole pet to threat situation. So that's a big red flag, but I wouldn't rule it out because I think, like you said, the word condition, I think it's just a phrase that people use. So you've got to dig a little deeper. Like you have to ask, well, what do you mean by that? We have to ask questions. We some of us are afraid to ask questions because like we don't want to be the trouble. We don't want to be the not a team player person. But
Mhm.
I need clarity so I know what kind of environment I'm working in. It doesn't make you a problem person. And if they see you as that, that might not be a safe space.
Mhm. When you think about, like, sick family systems, right, that often
Uh-huh.
becomes what happens in the workplace where family systems, they need a scapegoat, they need a black sheep, they need the golden child, there are all
Yes.
these sort of roles that people end up
Yes.
fitting into. And I love, you using that phrase because I used it as well around like people who name the problem become the
Mhm.
problem, right?
Hmm.
In that family system, you're not allowed to say, "Hey, this is broken," or "Hey, this is something that we need to address." It really thrives on silence. And
It does. It does. And think about all of the inventions we've had throughout all these centuries. If it weren't for someone saying, "Hey, we could do this better," and we wouldn't even have electricity, there are things we wouldn't even have if someone didn't like disturb the status quo. And it
mhm,
probably was uncomfortable for them to do that. And some people probably bucked against it, but you don't get innovation without that. But even there might be a situation where you were the pet and you were working on a project and then there was a project manager that you were smarter than. Like you knew more than this project manager, but they're the project manager. And they didn't like that. They might still use your ideas, but they could mess with your career down the line because they can't get over the fact that their ego was bruised. So it's kind of like it's hard to even put a plan in place for yourself because it's not just about your immediate leader. Sometimes you have to deal with the other leaders from the other groups that touch your job. So that's why the culture has to be psychologically safe, micro and macro.
mm, yes.
Dang. So much juiciness here. And remember, folks, she offers coaching. So you
Yes.
too could learn individually from her or institutionally. Um, and I know we kind of touched on gaslighting a little bit, but I wanted to hear a little bit more about the gaslight effect that you were kind of referencing. And any additional pieces of your research that we haven't totally hit on yet that you think are important?
I did a video this week because I was coaching someone and while we were talking, I realized that they were the leader, but I realized that they were the bully. And I realized it through what she was telling me and how she was responding to my questions. And she was a major gaslighter. And I had to break down to her gaslighters feed on reaction. I know it gives them evidence to justify their mistreatment or to question your professionalism. Well, she was experiencing having people on her team gray rock her because she was a gaslighter. And I said, that's their protection because gray rocking takes that power away. So, because you stop performing their narrative. Like, I'm not coming to your show. You're a major gaslighter. I don't want to be part of that show. So, I'm going to gray rock. It doesn't make you cold, it makes you controlled. While I don't think gray rocking is a good permanent fix, I think if you find yourself having a gray rock against a gaslighter, you should probably start planning your exit whether it takes you a month or a year or 2 years to get out. It's not a safe space. And in that chaotic world of gaslighters, that's going to be your power. And gaslighters, I feel like some of them learned that behavior because they've seen other leaders do it and it's been effective because people were silent. But the more we start to do things like gray rock for survival, the more we take the power away from gaslighters. It's hard to gaslight people with facts. So that's why I tell people document all of the patterns. You have to document it. Don't trust your memory. Don't trust someone else speaking up on your behalf. You have to document it. You're like, why do I have to be so detailed? You need date, time, whatever the meeting was. If you know the meeting location, you need that because a gaslighter will be able to flip that narrative if you don't have all the facts. Who was there? Who are the witnesses? Because if something leads up to an investigation because it escalates, those witnesses are likely not going to lie for that gaslighter because they don't want to get in trouble. So all the details you can, and it's not some big old ordeal. You jot it down. Takes you 5 minutes to jot down those details. Put it away. That's your proof. That is your evidence against a gaslighter. Gaslighting, people don't realize it is a major form of disrespect to me. Like, don't gaslight me. I study gaslighting. Don't do it. Because in most people, you'll get a negative reaction from that, and then you won't understand that.
The disrespect piece is so big,
Same.
so big. It's also one of my biggest triggers. And then passive aggressiveness, right? We think about like the four horsemen of the communication apocalypse, when you're reaching out to leadership to say, hey, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. And you get stonewalled, and then you get gaslit. And for somebody that's trying to exist in that system and keep it all together, that's where it just gets really, really challenging. So I wish leaders understood that, again, even just the stonewalling, right? When somebody's seeking support or seeking safety, just for you to affirm that person a little bit. It doesn't have to be you even admitting wrongdoing or anything, but
Right.
if somebody can treat you like you're not crazy, that makes a huge difference in everybody being able to move forward, right? Or if
Exactly.
they'll affirm you in private and then like beat you up in public, right? Or vice versa.
Yes.
Whew, it's just
Yes.
incredible. It's so
That one.
reminiscent of other like abuse situations, right?
Yes. I try to tell people we really do have to pay attention when somebody is trying to bait you or twist your words around. You can't match their energy. You have to flatten it. And the only way you can do that is to stay calm, stay brief, like don't give them more time than they need. And then the facts. The facts are your armor against gaslighters. Clarity. Clarity is your power against a gaslighter. If they keep asking you the same question, they're just trying to bait you no, you have to flatten that energy. Gaslighters, I think the worst ones are the ones who um use sarcasm or like snide remarks as a way to communicate. But when it's just one on one with you, they're all sunshine and smiles. Those are the worst to me because I start thinking, are you a narcissist? Like, what is going on here? Like, that is a dangerous, dangerous kind of leader to have. And you have to be strategic. You have to be street, but matching energy is the worst thing you can do.
Yeah, that I feel like is, if there's anything that I hope our listeners take from this, is that piece of it. Like, what parts can we take ownership of to create opportunity for surviving until we get our exit strategy, right? And I
Yes.
thought of a couple more things, but before I ask about that, I wanted to see if you could just briefly give a little description or definition of what gray rocking is, just in case our listeners aren't familiar.
Gray rocking is when you're basically not giving, I'm gonna call them, I don't call them bullies, but you're not giving the toxic people in your workplace any more than they need for you to perform your job. So the sunshine and smiles, how was your weekend? You're avoiding all of that. You're going in, you're doing your job. You could still go above and beyond in your performance, but you're not giving them any more of yourself. And that's important in toxic workplaces because the more you give them, the more ammo or ammunition you're giving them. So gray rocking is just emotionally, what is the word? Emotional detachment. Like I can go to a job where I've had jobs before where it literally was like a family because it wasn't toxic. Those jobs, I could be myself. When you're in a toxic environment, you can't because everything you tell them about your weekend, somebody might be jealous of the fact that you're this, or somebody might be jealous of the fact that you're doing that. And instead of them internalizing it and trying to make themselves better, they will target you because of that envy. So you can't give them any more than what they need. Give them what they need to do their job and what you need to do your job and go home. That is safe. I say that gray rocking isn't a good permanent survival strategy because you lose part of yourself when you gray rock. Because I'm an introvert, but I'm social when I need to be. If I have to gray rock, I'm losing part of who I am. So I never want to do that for a long time.
Yeah. And that still takes a lot of energy, especially
Yes.
if you're someone who's tends to be more, forthcoming in who you are and who wants to show up authentically and whole. So I
Yes.
really appreciate that piece. And I know Chelsea and I have talked about this a lot too with, again, the neurodivergence component that comes in, and sometimes the desire or the drive that's just like programmed in our brains to over explain, to
Yes.
overshare, to do all of these things. And so validating all of that as real. And again, like, what are the strategies that I need to apply here to remind myself that, like, not everyone deserves my whole self. And I think
Yes.
that, like, shift in framing for me was a game changer because, again, it puts the control in my hands to
Yes.
say, I get to decide what parts of me you get to
Hmm.
witness, and you don't deserve all of the parts of me, especially if you're not sharing the same with me. And at first, I think it was challenging because it feels a little inauthentic to have to like compartmentalize that way. But I think, again, doing that self work and really just reframing it as a self protection, as a gift that we don't give to everyone, like,
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know, it's just really powerful.
It is. That you don't deserve my whole self is really an acknowledgement that, my energy, my empathy, my intellect, my expertise, they're valuable resources, but they're not company property. We have to think about it that way. That's not company property. You're basically rejecting emotional exploitation. And when you're in a toxic workplace, especially if you're a high performer or you're someone who's empathetic, you know, there's an unspoken expectation to overgive, to be like endlessly patient, endlessly available and accommodating. That's why boundaries are so important. You know, what is it? I read something last weekend. Someone said, "You get my professionalism, not my peace." I'm not withholding my effort. I'm protecting my humanity. And
Hmm.
that's what it boils down to. Like, it's not company, I'm not company property.
Yes, I freaking love that framing. That's huge because
I
yeah.
have goosebumps. And I wish I would have had you so much sooner.
It's true, and like that's honestly one of the reasons we started this podcast is, especially in higher ed and serving professions in general, helping professions. There's this connection to our identity, to our self worth, and our work, and those become
Yes.
very intermingled to a place where people don't even have hobbies anymore. People don't even have outside ways that they express their humanity, their curiosity, their creativity. Everything's like in their workplace. And so that's been one of the things that we've really been trying to also just communicate is, again, your whole self is a gift, and truthfully, there's not one person that deserves that wholeness besides you. like there's parts of you that need to be protected with the utmost care. And like the workplace is one
Yes,
of the last places that deserves those most core, like base parts of who you are, you know?
exactly.
And so yeah, just remembering sometimes you just need to remember this is a contract. I am
Yes,
here. I have a very clear job description that I'm supposed to be doing, and I need to do that. And that's what I'm
yes.
here to do. And I don't need to identify with my job as like a thing. I talked about this in other episodes, but traveling the world was a huge eye opener for me. And I just recently got the opportunity to do that more. But being in other countries, like not once did people ask me what I do for a living. Not once.
Mm,
It was always just like, what do you do for fun? Where are you traveling?
yep.
What fun stuff? What's life like?
Mm-hmm.
And that was a huge culture shock to me
Yeah.
because in the US, we are totally intertwined with our work, and that's what we lead with. What do you do? And then from there, I decide what rank I put you in, how important it is for me to like care about you versus like, oh, you're that, like not worth,
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just very interesting to see like the difference in the way people operate around the world. And yeah, capitalism is a bitch.
When I left that last workplace, I told myself that I'm going to stop. Um, Acceptance and inclusion are important to me, but I'm going to stop auditioning for it in spaces that are just going to exploit my high performance, my excellence, and don't try to nurture me as a person. So that validation that a lot of high performers seek, I do videos about that all the time. Stop seeking validation from these toxic workplaces because it's just going to shatter your confidence and your nervous system. Um, we have to self protect. We do.
Whew.
Mhm.
Well, I feel like especially a lot of the people that have, a magic about them, right? That are visionary, that are extra compassionate, that are empathetic, that can imagine a different world. I think, that desire coupled with neurodivergence and trauma to like be understood, right? Or to
Yes.
be seen, or at minimum to not be treated like you're crazy.
Yes.
It can really have you just in this cycle of,
Yes.
yeah, trying to have people see you. So to take back your power and get out of that, I feel like is so important because it is, in addition to just being harmful, it's also just exhausting. Nobody
It
should
is.
have to perform that much in their life when they're giving so much, right? Um, and a lot of people are just going to be really, really committed to misunderstanding you or committed to not liking you or not seeing you. And just, I think, making peace with that is like, okay, like I am not for everybody. And I'm so okay with
Yes.
that because I'm not making myself small anymore to make you comfortable.
It's abuse. Abuse is abuse, whether it's in the family or in relationship or in the workplace. It's the same cycle, it's the same patterns, and it's the same harm. And I think people are starting to wake up to that. Like
Mhm.
people who are narcissists at home are vice presidents somewhere. And they're really not going to
Overwhelmingly.
change. Yes, they're really not going to
Research
change who they
very
are.
clearly shows that.
Yes,
Yeah.
there's research that backs it all up. Like we have to start looking at it like these are people, and the same toxic characteristics they have at home, they're going to have at work. So you have to use the same type of protective strategies to survive it if you choose to stay in it.
And I think people's conception of what narcissism looks like, right, is even like, I don't think a lot of people understand covert narcissism and
Mm,
how that looks different, right? And so people have this conception that, well, that person couldn't possibly be. And you're like, no, yeah. And I've studied a lot of this too, just because so much of my work has been focused on anti-violence against women
yes.
and children and things like that, right? Um, so even that awareness was like, okay, I'm not gonna, I'm not a doctor. However, I'm seeing all the red flags that I feel like I'm dealing with a covert narcissist, and so how do I survive this environment, you know? It's hard because it's really re-traumatizing.
That's a big part of this, recognizing red flags. And I think we have to go into these jobs with that armor, with that knowledge in our head. Like, um, you can't respond to what you refuse to recognize. So if you're thinking about narcissism and gaslighting and all of that, like if the goalposts are constantly being moved at your job, that's a red flag. They tell you one thing this week and something else a different week. Big red flag. If you're getting feedback that's like personal, not really developmental, like they're saying it's your attitude or you have tone, big red flag. Give me specifics. What about my tone? What about my attitude? Inconsistent rules. Other people get grace for the same mistakes that you make, but you get punished for those. None of these are performance issues. These are all tactics to control you, and these are all major red flags. And the more we recognize them, the earlier we recognize them, then we can then make a decision. Do are they coaching me? Are they trying to develop me? Or is this a pattern of abuse that's just going to get worse? And you can't put that strategy in place if you're not recognizing it and naming it. Like I said in one of my videos, you've got to start naming this stuff. Oh, they told me this last week and this week. Write it down. Another pattern. Like, oh, I'm dealing with a narcissist here. I can't use my usual strategies. I got to, tweak my strategy so I can survive this. So we just really have to pay attention.
Yeah, that discernment piece is so critical. Being able to really, yeah, determine and make those choices. Is this somebody who's, because I also have had managers in the past where they have shared information with me and it wasn't coming from a place of like punishment or embarrassing me or anything like that. It was like saying, especially as a woman of color, and this happened to be typically white folks that were, sharing some of the unwritten rules. And like that's super appreciated, right? Like in white corporate America, they want to see a nicety at the beginning of the email. My
Yes.
emails were always like, here's what I'm writing about. Like I don't need to be all flowery. I just saw you 5 minutes ago. You let me in the office next door. Like, why do I have to say all this extra bullshit? But it was like, there is something that people kind of expect and like I hadn't heard that before. Right. So then I was able to start implementing some of those tools to try to better survive the system, right? And so like that was kind of helpful sometimes, but it's really when it takes that shift to say you are not what we want, be more XYZ, don't be you, be this person, be this version of you that we want to see. That I think should be that fucking trigger moment of like, okay, this isn't actually intended to help or uplift me or teach me something. What is the
Oh,
intention behind this conversation?
right. Because if you really think about it, that same person that came to you and said, oh, we usually do this, should be going to the other people that made this
Totally.
thing the culture to say,
Yeah.
we love diverse perspectives, which means we have diverse communication styles. As long as it's not rude or disrespectful, this is how I communicate. So the same efforts you put into telling me I need to stick with the status quo, you could be trying to change the system.
Mhm. Yep. And I was thinking too how much of that is gendered, right? Like
Totally.
when women, and especially women of color, are direct, right? That is interpreted as rude or combative or whatever. Whereas a man does that, that's just leadership, right?
That's just how
And
he is.
yeah, or if you have a really strong presence, right? That's threatening. It's
Confidence.
Yes.
yeah, the
Yes.
confidence is it's too much, right? So if you can just take yourself down, 2 notches, that would
Yes.
be great.
Yeah. Where you
Shrink
belong.
yourself.
Yep.
Shrink
Shrink yourself.
yourself.
Wow. Well, I think this has been super helpful. One thing I wanted to kind of bring into the conversation as you talked about documentation, we say this all the time, but just reiterating, like you have to be responsible for being able to tell your own story,
Yes.
because even if things are good now, they may not always be good, right? And so, like, what are we doing to track our own successes? How are we making sure that we are also documenting where mistakes are being made and the resolution to those mistakes? Because at some point, those things can come back. And if you don't have documentation to say, well, here's what I did to try to fix that, and here's where the ball was dropped. And I wrote an email following up after that meeting to be like, it was nice talking to you about X, Y, and Z. Like,
Mhm.
I also think people overthink the documentation component, and that it,
Yes.
it has to be this like really intense thing. And it really is just having a time-stamped record of what went down, so that if there's misunderstanding, and that's being generous, later we can come back and be like, remember this email where I said X, Y,
Mhm.
and Z and he didn't clarify any of that
Yes.
and basically agreed? That's where we're at now. And the other hot tip I like to share about documentation is, if you don't feel comfortable like writing it down, or that's not your vibe, do a voice memo. Just do a
Yes.
voice memo on your phone real quick.
Yes.
On that day, it's timestamped. You can talk into it. Again, doesn't have to be a 1 hour voice memo, just a little 5 minute. Here's what
Mhm.
happened. Here's who was there. Here's the outcome, right? So
That's it.
find the system of documentation that works for you. But
Mhm.
hot tip,
I'm a
hottest
I'm a
to below.
huge advocate for documentation. It's it's your quiet resistance. You might not, like you said, you might not need it right now, but you never know when you'll have to escalate something. People need to stop looking at it like paranoia. It's protection. And when you're working in a toxic culture, your stories are getting rewritten all the time, and you're not even
Exactly.
in the room when people are reframing things. Documentation is how you keep your story straight, not just for your leader, but for HR,
For
lawyers,
everything.
even your own sanity. It's so important.
Yeah.
It's like the adult version of journaling. You're like,
No,
"Dear
literally.
diary, today this bitch came at me so sideways, and I said this, and she said this, and then I said this."
Yes,
For real though. For real.
yes,
You're like, make it, if you gotta make it joyous, do that, you know?
oh yes, oh
That is
yes,
where
oh
a lot
yes,
of my documentation ended up, in journals. Just like,
yes,
which is also self-care, right? Like, getting that frustration out in some way has been also super helpful, rather than just like it sitting on my heart and in my
yes,
chest all the time. And then there's just
yes,
more that gets stuffed on and stuffed on and stuffed on. And I think that's why at some point it explodes, because we can't hold all of that, right? So
exactly.
And it protects you from gaslighting yourself later on,
totally.
right? Workplace can be like a romantic relationship where later on you're like, well, he's not that bad, we had all these good times and da da da. And then you go back to your diary and you're like, nope, nope, the
Exactly.
sex wasn't even that good. But, just to remind yourself that that what you experienced was real, and to not romanticize it, I think is super important.
Absolutely.
Well, we are just about out of time, and if Dr. B is up for it, we will
Mhm.
definitely have her back as she
Of
continues
course.
her research and learning. But are there any kind of last minute tips or resources or words that you want to leave our listeners with?
You know, if you're surviving a toxic workplace, I want you to remember that you're not weak for protecting yourself. You're being wise. And the strategies that you've heard here, they aren't really about shrinking yourself. They're about being strategic in your self-preservation. Because the goal really isn't to survive the workplace, it's to leave with your dignity intact, to leave with your confidence intact and your sense of self. Because if you have to do things like gray rocking, you've got to return back to your full self at some point. Sometimes self employment or entrepreneurship becomes our healthiest exit strategy. And it might not be something you can do right away, but it's something you can work towards, which will give you hope. And that little bit of hope is another way to get through the toxicity. For many of us, how we reclaim autonomy after being punished for being truth tellers is it's a testament to our authenticity.
Mm.
And we're just trying to simply exist. We're trying to simply exist, come to work, do our job. If these companies don't value us and don't treat us respectfully, we're giving them our energy that they don't deserve. So a lot of times, yes, different means target, pet to threat. And that's the truth that many of us have lived. All three of us have lived that. But different also means necessary, because status quo, you're not going to innovate in the status quo. If you're listening and you've been gaslit or marginalized or pushed out, I want you to understand that this was not a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of someone else's insecurity or fear or need to control. So,
Mm.
Thank
Church.
you.
If you started a church, I would join too.
We're giving her too much to do right now.
Putting it out there, just putting it out there.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Braden. We have really enjoyed this time together and hope our listeners resonate and got some hot tips to help them survive until we can shift into thriving, which is ultimately the goal, right? And
yes,
really
absolutely.
want to reemphasize, don't choose these survival patterns as your permanent solution.
Yeah.
That I think is the thing that really stood out to me is
Mhm.
even if the exit isn't possible right in this moment, like you
Mhm.
can be doing stuff to prepare for the
Yes.
exit
Yes.
with strategy, right? So I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
It's what's sticking with me. I mean, all of it really, but that stood out the most right now. So anything else you want to add, Chels?
I just need to steep on all of it again. I can't wait to watch this versus just to like take it all in again, because yeah, you have so much wisdom to impart, and you've lived it, you've done it. And so to hear this from you, especially as a Black woman, right? I think it's just really powerful and helpful. So I just want to appreciate you again.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes. And again, like Anna said, it won't be the last. We're just going to bug you.
Okay.
Remember
Wonderful.
that.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you again. And thank you everyone for tuning in. And as always, we are hopeful that we will be able to stay rooted
Stay
Yes.
radical.
and stay resisting.
Yes.
Woo!
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, y'all.
This podcast is for storytelling, education, and entertainment purposes only. Nothing we share should be taken as legal, medical, financial, or professional advice. Everything you hear is based on our own lived experiences and opinions. We are not representing any institution, employer, or organization, only ourselves. Listeners should always do their own research and seek professional guidance where needed.